My name is Hazel Martinez. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my own sister would literally watch me die. The sharp pain that shot through my chest during our family dinner wasn't just heartburn like she insisted. When I collapsed in her kitchen, gasping for air and begging for help, Brianna looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stop overreacting." She physically blocked me from calling 911, telling everyone I was just being dramatic for attention. But when the paramedics finally arrived and the doctor spoke those words that changed everything, her face went white as a sheet. Before we dive into what happened that terrifying night, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story resonates with you or someone you know, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this unfolds. Let's get into the shocking details that nearly cost me my life. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs years earlier, but when you're living inside a toxic family dynamic, the patterns become normalized in the most dangerous ways. Brianna had always been the golden child in our household, 3 years older than me and seemingly incapable of doing wrong in our mother's eyes. Growing up, whenever I complained of feeling sick or hurt, Brianna would roll her eyes and mutter something about me being such a baby, or always looking for sympathy. Our mother Carol would usually take Brianna's side, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her hand and telling me to toughen up. This pattern continued well into our adult years, becoming increasingly dangerous as my health issues became more serious. Just 6 months before the incident I'm about to tell you about, I'd been experiencing severe migraines that were affecting my work as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. When I mentioned them to Brianna during one of our weekly family dinners, she actually laughed and said I was probably just stressed because I couldn't handle my job properly. She suggested I was making excuses for poor performance, even though I'd just received a promotion and glowing reviews from my supervisors. The night everything changed started innocently enough. We were gathered at Brianna's suburban home for what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for my recent promotion to senior paralegal. Brianna had insisted on hosting, claiming she wanted to properly honor my achievement, though looking back, I realized this was probably part of her plan to maintain control over the situation. Her husband Derek was there, along with our mother Carol, and the conversation was flowing normally over appetizers when the pain first struck. It started as a dull ache in the center of my chest, nothing too alarming at first. I thought maybe I'd eaten too quickly, or perhaps the stress of my new responsibilities was catching up with me. But within minutes, the pain intensified dramatically, spreading across my entire chest and radiating down my left arm. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and I found myself struggling to catch my breath. The room started spinning slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the dining table to steady myself. "I think something's wrong," I managed to say, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. "My chest really hurts, and I'm having trouble breathing." The concern in my own voice was unmistakable, but instead of alarm, I saw that familiar look of irritation cross Brianna's face. She set down her wine glass with an exaggerated sigh and fixed me with that condescending stare I knew so well from childhood. "Oh, here we go again with the drama," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is it this time, Hazel? Are you feeling neglected because the conversation isn't centered on you for 5 minutes?" The cruelty in her tone was shocking, even by her usual standards. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly sensing that something was genuinely wrong with me, but he remained silent, as he usually did when Brianna was in one of her moods. As the pain continued to intensify, I stood up from the table, thinking that moving around might help, but the sudden motion made everything worse. The chest pain became crushing, like someone was sitting on my ribcage, and my vision started to blur around the edges. "Please," I gasped, reaching for my phone. "I think I need to call 911. Something is really wrong. But before I could even unlock my phone, Brianna was on her feet, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move before. Absolutely not, she said firmly, actually reaching out and grabbing my phone from my hands. You are not calling an ambulance because you're having a panic attack. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that would be? What would the neighbors think? The fact that she was more concerned about her reputation than my health should have been a red flag, but I was in too much pain to fully process the implications of her response. Our mother Carol looked back and forth between us, clearly unsure of what to do. Maybe we should just take her to urgent care, she suggested weakly, but Brianna immediately shut that down too. Mom, don't enable this behavior. She's done this before, remember? Every time she wants attention, she suddenly develops some mysterious illness. She's fine. She just needs to calm down and stop being so dramatic. The pain was becoming unbearable now, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest in an irregular rhythm that terrified me. I tried to explain to them that this felt completely different from any anxiety I'd ever experienced, that something was genuinely wrong with my heart, but Brianna continued to dismiss every word I said. When I attempted to reach for the landline phone in their kitchen, she actually stepped in front of me, physically blocking my access to help. You're not calling anyone, she said coldly. You're going to sit down, take some deep breaths, and stop this ridiculous performance. I'm not going to let you ruin another family gathering with your need for constant attention. The words hit me like a slap across the face, but what was even more devastating was watching Derek and our mother simply stand by and allow her to prevent me from getting medical help when I was clearly in distress. As I stood there in Brianna's kitchen, clutching my chest and fighting for every breath, memories of previous medical emergencies came flooding back with crystal clarity. This wasn't the first time my family had dismissed serious health concerns, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. When I was 16 years old, I developed severe abdominal pain that lasted for 3 days. I begged my parents to take me to the doctor, but Brianna convinced them I was just trying to get out of a school exam I was nervous about. By the time they finally brought me to the emergency room, my appendix had nearly ruptured, and the surgeon said I could have died if they'd waited even a few more hours. During my college years, I'd suffered from panic attacks that were so severe they sent me to the campus health center multiple times. When I tried to explain these episodes to my family, Brianna would shake her head and tell everyone that I was just attention-seeking and couldn't handle the pressure of adult responsibilities. She convinced our parents that I was being dramatic and that giving me sympathy would only encourage more of what she called my theatrical behavior. Looking back now, I realize those panic attacks might have been early warning signs of the heart condition that was about to nearly kill me. The chest pain continued to intensify, and I could feel my body going into some kind of crisis mode. Sweat was pouring down my face despite the comfortable temperature in the house, and my vision was becoming increasingly blurred. I tried to explain to my family that this felt completely different from any anxiety or panic attack I'd ever experienced, that the physical sensations were unlike anything I'd felt before, but Brianna remained unmoved by my pleas. Look at her, Brianna said to our mother, gesturing toward me with obvious disgust. She's actually sweating now. Do you see how far she's willing to take this act? She's probably worked herself up so much that she's having a psychosomatic response. This is exactly what I was talking about when I said we needed to stop enabling her behavior. Her clinical, detached analysis of my suffering was chilling, especially considering that I was her only sibling and supposedly someone she cared about. Derek, who had been silent throughout most of this ordeal, finally spoke up. Brianna, I really think something might be wrong, he said cautiously. Look at how pale she is. Maybe we should just err on the side of caution and call for help. But his wife immediately shut him down, with a withering look that could have frozen water. "Derek, don't you start too. I know my sister better than anyone, and this is exactly how she behaves when she wants to be the center of attention. If we call an ambulance, we'll just be reinforcing her belief that throwing tantrums gets her what she wants." Our mother Carol was wringing her hands nervously, clearly torn between her daughters. "I just don't know," she kept repeating. "Maybe Brianna's right. Hazel has always been the more sensitive one. Remember when she was convinced she had food poisoning last year, but it turned out to be just a stomach bug? The fact that my own mother was using past illnesses as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to assess my own medical condition was devastating, but I was in too much physical distress to fully process the emotional betrayal. The pain in my chest was now radiating down both arms, and I could feel a strange tingling sensation in my fingertips. My heart felt like it was beating completely out of rhythm, sometimes racing so fast I could barely keep track, then slowing down to an almost stop before racing again. "Please," I begged them one more time. "I think I'm having a heart attack. Please just call 911. Please don't let me die." The desperation in my voice was raw and unmistakable, but Brianna remained completely unmoved. "You're not having a heart attack," she said with absolute certainty. "You're 28 years old, you don't smoke, you're not overweight, and you have no family history of heart disease. You're having a panic attack because you're stressed about your new job responsibilities, and you're trying to get sympathy by making everyone think you're dying. It's manipulative and cruel, especially to Mom, who's already worried about getting older and her own health." Just as I felt like I might collapse completely, our neighbor Mrs. Patterson appeared at the back door. She'd apparently seen the commotion through the window and come over to check if everything was all right. When she saw my condition, her face immediately filled with concern. "Oh my goodness, what's happening to Hazel?" she asked, rushing to my side. "She looks terrible. Have you called an ambulance?" Mrs. Patterson had been a nurse for 30 years before retiring, and her medical training was immediately apparent in how she assessed my situation. "We haven't called anyone because she's fine," Brianna said tersely, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "She's just having one of her episodes, where she needs to be dramatic and get attention from everyone. We're not going to reward this behavior by making a big scene." But Mrs. Patterson ignored Brianna completely, instead taking my pulse and noting my symptoms with professional concern. "This is not a panic attack," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Her pulse is extremely irregular, she's diaphoretic, and she's showing clear signs of cardiac distress. Someone needs to call 911 immediately." Finally, having a medical professional validate my experience was both relieving and terrifying, because it confirmed that something was genuinely wrong, while also making it clear that my own family had been willing to let me suffer rather than admit they might be wrong about my condition. Derek, perhaps emboldened by Mrs. Patterson's assessment, finally took action and called 911 despite Brianna's furious protests. As we waited for the paramedics to arrive, Brianna continued to insist that everyone was overreacting, and that I was successfully manipulating the situation to get the attention I supposedly craved. Even when the sirens could be heard approaching the house, she maintained that the whole thing was an elaborate performance designed to ruin her dinner party. The paramedics, who responded to Derek's call, were seasoned professionals, who took one look at my condition and immediately recognized that something serious was happening. Within seconds of their arrival, they had me connected to a portable EKG machine and were administering oxygen while checking my vital signs. The lead paramedic, a woman named Jennifer who'd clearly seen her share of cardiac emergencies, looked at the readings on her equipment and immediately radioed ahead to the hospital that they were bringing in a young woman with what appeared to be acute cardiac symptoms. We're going to get you to the hospital right away," Jennifer told me as they prepared the stretcher. Try to stay calm and focus on your breathing. We're going to take good care of you. The professionalism and concern in her voice was such a stark contrast to how my own family had treated me that I actually started crying, partly from relief and partly from the emotional trauma of what I had just experienced. Brianna, however, remained defiant even as the paramedics were loading me into the ambulance. "This is completely unnecessary," she announced to anyone who would listen. "She's having a panic attack, and now you're all feeding into her delusion that something serious is wrong. This is exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior I was trying to prevent by not calling you in the first place." The paramedics exchanged glances that clearly indicated they thought Brianna's attitude was inappropriate, but they remained professional and focused on getting me to the hospital. During the ambulance ride, Jennifer continued monitoring my heart rhythm and noted several concerning irregularities that she radioed ahead to the emergency department. "We've got a 28-year-old female with chest pain, diaphoresis, irregular heartbeat, and what appears to be some kind of stress-induced cardiomyopathy," she reported. "Patient is conscious and alert, but in significant distress. Family reports this as anxiety, but EKG is showing abnormal patterns consistent with cardiac event." At the hospital, I was immediately taken to a cardiac bay where Dr. Williams, the attending emergency physician, began a comprehensive evaluation of my condition. Dr. Williams was a tall, distinguished man in his early 40s with graying temples and the kind of calm, authoritative presence that immediately inspired confidence. He listened carefully to my account of what had happened, asking detailed questions about the onset and nature of my symptoms while also noting my family's response to my medical emergency. "I'm going to order some tests to get to the bottom of what's going on," Dr. Williams explained as nurses prepared to draw blood and set up more comprehensive cardiac monitoring. "Based on what the paramedics are telling me and what I'm seeing on your EKG, this doesn't appear to be a simple anxiety attack. We're going to run a complete cardiac panel, including troponin levels to check for heart muscle damage, and I want to get an echocardiogram to look at your heart function." Brianna, who had followed the ambulance to the hospital with Derek and our mother, continued to insist to anyone who would listen that the whole situation was blown out of proportion. When Dr. Williams came out to speak with the family about my condition, she immediately launched into her familiar speech about my supposed history of attention-seeking behavior and dramatic overreactions to minor health issues. "Doctor, I think you should know that my sister has a pattern of exaggerating her symptoms when she wants sympathy," Brianna told him with complete confidence. "She's done this before, and I was trying to prevent exactly this kind of unnecessary emergency room visit. She's probably just stressed about her new job, and she's always been the type to turn a minor anxiety attack into a major medical drama." Dr. Williams listened to Brianna's assessment with a neutral expression, but I could see something shift in his demeanor as she continued to minimize my condition even while I was lying there connected to multiple monitors, showing clearly abnormal readings. "I appreciate your input," he said carefully, "but I need to let you know that your sister's test results are showing some very concerning findings that are absolutely not consistent with an anxiety attack. The first round of blood tests came back showing significantly elevated troponin levels, which indicated that there had been damage to my heart muscle. This was followed by an echocardiogram that revealed my heart was not pumping effectively, with an ejection fraction well below normal levels. Dr. Williams explained that I was suffering from a condition called stress cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome, where severe emotional or physical stress can actually cause the heart muscle to temporarily weaken and malfunction. This is a very real and potentially life-threatening condition, Dr. Williams explained to my family, his voice taking on a more serious tone. If Hazel had not received medical attention when she did, she could have gone into complete heart failure. The delay in calling for help could have been catastrophic, and I need all of you to understand that this was a genuine cardiac emergency, not a psychiatric issue." The color drained from Brianna's face as Dr. Williams continued his explanation. Stress cardiomyopathy can be triggered by severe emotional trauma, and while it's often reversible with proper treatment, it requires immediate medical intervention and ongoing cardiac monitoring. Your sister will need to stay in the hospital for several days while we stabilize her heart function and determine the best course of treatment moving forward. Our mother Carol broke down in tears when she realized how close she'd come to losing me, and even Derek looked shaken by the revelation that my condition had been so serious. But what struck me most was watching Brianna's reaction as she struggled to process the fact that her dismissive attitude toward my symptoms could have resulted in my death. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed genuinely speechless, unable to maintain her usual confident assertions about my supposed dramatics. Dr. Williams went on to explain that I would need immediate surgery to place a temporary device to help my heart pump more effectively, followed by weeks of medication and cardiac rehabilitation. The hospital's social worker, a compassionate woman named Susan, also became involved in my case after the medical team expressed concerns about the family dynamics they'd witnessed during my emergency treatment. During my recovery in the cardiac care unit, something unexpected happened that would change everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Brianna. Derek, who had been unusually quiet since the doctor's revelation about my condition, asked if he could speak with me privately. What he told me during that conversation was so shocking that at first I thought I must be misunderstanding him, perhaps due to the medications I was taking for my heart condition. "Hazel, there's something I need to tell you, and I should have said something a long time ago," Derek began, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. "Brianna has been sabotaging your health care for years. I've watched her throw away doctor referrals that came in the mail for you, and she's intercepted phone calls from medical offices trying to schedule follow-up appointments." The words hit me like a physical blow, even as my heart monitor began beeping more rapidly in response to my rising stress levels. Derek went on to explain that he'd witnessed Brianna deliberately hiding medical correspondence that had been delivered to their house when I was temporarily using their address during a brief period between apartments 2 years earlier. "She threw away at least 3 letters from specialists that your primary care doctor had referred you to," he continued. "When you mentioned that you hadn't heard back from those doctors, she would just shrug and suggest that maybe they weren't taking new patients, or that your insurance didn't cover their services." But the medical sabotage was only the beginning of what Derek revealed during our conversation. He told me that Brianna had been working systematically to undermine my reputation and credibility, particularly regarding my health and mental stability. She had been spreading rumors to extended family members, suggesting that I was becoming increasingly unstable, and that my various health complaints were evidence of psychological problems rather than legitimate medical concerns. "She's been building a narrative," Derek explained, "that you're unreliable and mentally unstable. She's told your cousins, your aunts and uncles, even some family friends that you're having a breakdown, and that someone needs to step in and take control of your affairs before you hurt yourself or make poor decisions." The calculated nature of this campaign was breathtaking in its cruelty, and I began to understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family dysfunction, but something much more sinister and deliberate. Derek then revealed something that made my blood run cold. He told me that Brianna had been researching legal guardianship procedures, and had consulted with attorneys about the process of having someone declared mentally incompetent. "She's been collecting what she calls evidence of your instability," he said. "Every time you've had a health scare, every time you've seemed stressed or anxious, she's been documenting it and presenting it as proof that you can't take care of yourself." The financial motive behind Brianna's behavior became clear when Derek explained that our mother had recently updated her will leaving her considerable estate to be divided equally between Brianna and me. Brianna has been obsessing over this, Derek told me. She feels like she deserves everything because she's been the stable daughter who's taken care of Mom over the years. She sees you as a threat to what she considers her inheritance, and she's been working to position herself as Mom's primary caretaker and decision-maker. Even more disturbing was Derek's revelation that Brianna had been contacting my workplace, making subtle suggestions to my supervisors that I might be struggling with personal issues that could affect my job performance. She called your office about 6 months ago, Derek said, claiming to be concerned about your stress levels and suggesting that maybe you were taking on more responsibility than you could handle. She never explicitly said you were having problems, but she planted seeds of doubt about your reliability. The scope of Brianna's manipulation became even clearer when Derek told me about phone records he discovered that showed multiple calls to various family members, always with the same message: that I was becoming increasingly unstable and that everyone needed to be careful not to enable what she described as my deteriorating mental health. She had been systematically poisoning my relationships with people I cared about, all while maintaining the facade of being a concerned and caring sister. I found legal documents in her desk, Derek continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been consulting with attorneys about having you declared incompetent so she could become your legal guardian. The plan was to use your medical history, particularly any mental health issues or anxiety problems, as evidence that you can't make sound decisions for yourself. The realization that my own sister had been planning to have me declared legally incompetent was so shocking that I could barely process it. Derek explained that Brianna's plan had been accelerated by my recent job promotion, which she saw as a threat to her narrative about my instability. She was furious when you got that promotion, he said. It contradicted everything she'd been telling people about your inability to handle responsibility. That's why she was so determined to dismiss your symptoms that night. If you'd had a genuine medical emergency that required hospitalization, it would have looked bad for her case that you were becoming unstable and unreliable. The most chilling part of Derek's revelation was his description of how Brianna had been documenting my behavior and health issues, creating what she called a file of evidence that could be used to support a legal challenge to my competency. She has photos, emails, text messages, anything she could use to paint a picture of someone who's losing their grip on reality, Derek said. She's been planning this for months, maybe even years. As Derek finished telling me everything he knew about Brianna's systematic campaign against me, I felt a mix of rage, betrayal, and determination that I'd never experienced before. The woman I'd thought was just an unsympathetic sister was actually someone who had been actively working to destroy my life, my health, my career, and my relationships. But now that I knew the truth, I could finally start fighting back. The revelation of Brianna's systematic campaign against me transformed my grief and confusion into a laser-focused determination to seek justice and protect myself from further harm. As soon as I was stable enough to think clearly, I reached out to my colleague James Patterson, one of the senior attorneys at my law firm, who specialized in family law and had experience with cases involving elder abuse and guardianship disputes. James had always been a mentor to me professionally, and when I explained what I'd discovered about Brianna's behavior, he immediately understood the legal implications of what she'd been doing. What you're describing constitutes a form of medical abuse and potentially attempted fraud, James told me during our first consultation, which took place in my hospital room with Dr. Williams' permission. The fact that she was actively preventing you from receiving medical care, while simultaneously building a case to have you declared incompetent suggests a calculated plan to gain control over your assets and decision-making ability. We need to move quickly to protect you and gather evidence before she realizes that her plan has been exposed. James helped me understand that I had several legal options available to me, including filing for a restraining order against Brianna, pursuing criminal charges for endangerment and fraud, and initiating a civil lawsuit to recover damages for the harm she'd caused to my health, career, and reputation. But first, we needed to gather comprehensive evidence of her behavior, and that meant reaching out to everyone who might have witnessed or been affected by her manipulation campaign. Derek's cooperation was crucial to building our case. Despite the obvious strain it put on his marriage, he agreed to provide sworn testimony about everything he'd witnessed regarding Brianna's sabotage of my medical care and her research into having me declared incompetent. He also provided copies of the legal documents he'd found in Brianna's desk, as well as phone records showing her calls to family members and my workplace. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, who had insisted on calling 911 the night of my cardiac emergency, also became a key ally in our case. Not only had she witnessed Brianna's refusal to seek medical help for me, but she'd actually been recording video on her phone when she saw the commotion through the window. The footage clearly showed Brianna blocking my access to the telephone and dismissing my obvious distress as dramatics and attention-seeking behavior. "I've been a nurse for 30 years, Mrs. Patterson told James during her interview, and I've never seen someone's family member actively prevent them from getting medical help during a cardiac emergency. What Brianna did that night was unconscionable, and if Derek hadn't finally called 911, Hazel could have died. I've seen stress cardiomyopathy before, and it can be fatal if not treated immediately." As we continued gathering evidence, other family members began coming forward with their own stories about Brianna's behavior. My cousin Lucy, who lived across the country but stayed in touch with our extended family through social media and phone calls, revealed that Brianna had been systematically contacting relatives to spread rumors about my mental health and stability. "She called me about 6 months ago," Lucy told us, claiming she was worried about you and asking if I'd noticed any strange behavior during our phone conversations. "When I said you seemed fine to me," she started listing all these supposed symptoms of mental illness that she claimed you were exhibiting. "She made it sound like you were having a complete breakdown, and that the family needed to intervene before you hurt yourself." Uncle Frank, our mother's brother, shared a similar story about receiving multiple phone calls from Brianna over the past year. "She kept telling me that Hazel was having problems with drugs or alcohol," he said, "and that she was concerned about your ability to take care of yourself. She asked me not to mention these conversations to you because she said it might trigger some kind of psychotic episode. Looking back now, I realize she was trying to turn the whole family against you." The evidence we were gathering painted a picture of someone who had been methodically working to isolate me and destroy my support system while positioning herself as the responsible family member who needed to take control of my life. But perhaps the most damaging evidence came from my own medical records, which showed a pattern of missed appointments and follow-up visits that I had never known about, because Brianna had intercepted the scheduling calls and correspondence. Dr. Williams agreed to provide expert testimony about the severity of my cardiac condition and the potential consequences of delaying medical treatment. "In my professional opinion," he told James, "the delay in seeking medical attention could have resulted in complete heart failure and death. Stress cardiomyopathy is a serious condition that requires immediate intervention, and anyone who prevents someone from seeking emergency medical care is putting that person's life at risk." The hospital's social worker, Susan, also became involved in our case after conducting her own investigation into the family dynamics surrounding my emergency treatment. In 20 years of social work, Susan told James, "I've rarely seen such a clear pattern of medical abuse within a family structure." The fact that Brianna continued to minimize and dismiss the patient's symptoms even after medical professionals had confirmed a serious cardiac condition suggests a complete disregard for her sister's well-being and safety. As we built our legal case, I also began working with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and abuse. Dr. Sarah Chen helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just sibling rivalry or family dysfunction, but a form of systematic psychological and medical abuse that had been escalating over many years. What your sister did represents a pattern of coercive control, Dr. Chen explained, where she used your family's trust and your own self-doubt to prevent you from getting the help you needed while positioning herself as the authority on your mental and physical health. With each piece of evidence we gathered, the scope of Brianna's manipulation became more apparent. She had been playing a long game, carefully undermining my credibility and health while building a legal case to gain control over my life and assets. But now that her plan was exposed, I had the evidence and legal support I needed to fight back and protect myself from further harm. Once Brianna realized that Derek had betrayed her confidence, and that I was building a legal case against her, she shifted from her usual manipulative tactics to a much more aggressive and desperate approach. The first sign that she knew her carefully constructed plan was falling apart came when Derek found her frantically searching through their home office, apparently looking for the legal documents he had already turned over to my attorney. When confronted, she initially tried to deny everything, but quickly shifted to a more threatening stance. "You have no idea what you've done," she told Derek during what would turn out to be one of their final conversations as husband and wife. "Hazel is sick. She's always been sick, and now you're helping her destroy this family with her lies and manipulation. When this all comes out, everyone will see that I was trying to protect her from herself, and you helped her turn everyone against me." The fact that she still maintained her narrative about my supposed mental instability, even when faced with overwhelming evidence to the contrary, demonstrated just how deeply committed she was to her delusional version of events. Brianna's first legal countermove was to file for a restraining order against me, claiming that I had been harassing and threatening her since my release from the hospital. The petition she filed with the court painted a picture of me as an unstable individual who was engaging in a campaign of intimidation against my own sister, supposedly in retaliation for her reasonable concerns about my mental health. She claimed that I had been making threatening phone calls, sending harassing text messages, and even showing up at her workplace to confront her about her justified skepticism regarding my medical condition. The restraining order petition was filled with carefully crafted lies that demonstrated just how skilled Brianna had become at manipulating legal and medical systems. She claimed that I had a history of erratic behavior and violent outbursts that made her fear for her safety, citing incidents that had either never happened or had been completely misrepresented. For example, she described a family gathering from 2 years earlier where I had supposedly attacked her during an argument, when what had actually happened was that I had raised my voice in frustration after she dismissed my concerns about our mother's health. But Brianna's most audacious move was her attempt to have my own medical records sealed or discredited, claiming that my cardiac emergency had been misdiagnosed and that I was actually suffering from a psychiatric condition that made me delusional about my physical health. She hired an expensive attorney named Richard Blackwood, who specialized in cases involving mental health and competency issues, and together they began building a counter-narrative that portrayed me as a dangerous individual who was using false medical claims to manipulate the legal system. "My client has been the victim of a systematic campaign of harassment and false accusations," Blackwood argued in his initial court filings. "The petitioner has a documented history of mental instability and has been using fabricated medical emergencies to gain sympathy and attention from family members. My client's only crime was trying to prevent her sister from abusing emergency medical services and traumatizing their elderly mother with unnecessary medical dramas." Brianna also launched a social media campaign designed to portray herself as the victim of my supposed vindictive behavior. She created posts on Facebook and Instagram describing how she was being attacked by her own sister for trying to help me deal with my mental health issues. She shared carefully edited text message conversations that made it appear as though I was threatening her, when in reality, I had been asking legitimate questions about her interference with my medical care. The most dangerous aspect of Brianna's counterattack was her renewed effort to contact my workplace and spread rumors about my mental stability and fitness for duty. She called my supervising attorney and claimed that I had been making threatening statements about my intention to destroy family members who had wronged me, suggesting that I might pose a safety risk to colleagues or clients. She also implied that my recent medical leave had been due to psychiatric rather than cardiac issues, and that I might not be ready to return to the high-stress environment of legal practice. Brianna even went so far as to threaten Derek with a divorce that would leave him financially devastated if he continued to support my campaign of lies against her. She told him that she had documented his betrayal of their marriage, and that she would use his cooperation with my legal case as grounds for divorce, seeking alimony and half of their assets, while painting him as an unreliable husband who had chosen loyalty to his sister-in-law over his own wife. "She's completely lost touch with reality," Derek told me during one of our conversations about Brianna's escalating behavior. "She genuinely believes that she's the victim in all of this, and that everyone else is part of some conspiracy against her. She started keeping detailed notes about every conversation we have, every phone call I make, every interaction with you or your attorney, as if she's building some kind of case against me too." Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Brianna's counterattack was her attempt to manipulate our mother Carol into supporting her version of events. She spent hours with our mother, carefully reconstructing the narrative of my cardiac emergency to make it sound like I had manipulated the medical staff into misdiagnosing a psychiatric condition as a heart problem. She claimed that I had been coached by my attorney to exaggerate my symptoms, and that the whole legal case was part of an elaborate scheme to gain access to our mother's inheritance. "Brianna has been working on Mom constantly," Derek warned me. "She's telling her that you're planning to have her declared incompetent too, and that your real goal is to take control of her finances and put her in a nursing home. She's playing on all of Mom's fears about aging and losing her independence, and it's working. Mom is starting to question whether she can trust you, or whether Brianna has been right about your mental state all along." The emotional toll of Brianna's counterattack was enormous, but it also revealed just how desperate she had become as her original plan fell apart. Every lie she told, every false accusation she made, every attempt to manipulate the legal system only provided more evidence of her true character, and the lengths she was willing to go to maintain control over the narrative about my health and competency. Just when Brianna's counterattack seemed to be gaining momentum, and I was starting to doubt whether anyone would believe my version of events, an unexpected coalition of supporters began to emerge. Dr. Williams, who had treated me during my cardiac emergency, took the unprecedented step of agreeing to provide expert testimony not just about my medical condition, but about the dangerous delays in seeking treatment that could have cost me my life. His willingness to speak publicly about what he'd witnessed that night gave our case the kind of medical credibility that would be difficult for Brianna's attorney to challenge. In 30 years of emergency medicine, Dr. Williams told my attorney James Patterson, "I've never seen a family member so adamantly oppose appropriate medical care for someone in obvious cardiac distress." What makes this case particularly concerning is that the defendant continued to minimize the patient's condition even after we had confirmed a serious heart emergency. This suggests either a complete lack of medical knowledge or a deliberate disregard for the patient's well-being. The hospital's security footage became another crucial piece of evidence that supported our case and undermined Brianna's attempts to portray herself as the victim. The recordings from that night clearly showed her blocking my access to the telephone, dismissing the concerns of Mrs. Patterson and the paramedics, and continuing to argue with medical staff even as I was being loaded into the ambulance. Her body language and aggressive demeanor were captured on multiple cameras, providing visual evidence that contradicted her claims of being a concerned sister, who was simply trying to prevent an unnecessary emergency room visit. Derek's decision to choose my well-being over his marriage to Brianna proved to be a turning point in the case, but it came at enormous personal cost. When Brianna realized that he was going to testify against her, she followed through on her threat to file for divorce, claiming that his betrayal had made their marriage impossible to continue. Derek moved out of their shared home and filed his own counterpetition for divorce, citing Brianna's abusive behavior and psychological manipulation as grounds for dissolution of their marriage. "I should have spoken up years ago," Derek told me as we prepared for his testimony. "I watched her systematically undermine you, and I convinced myself that it wasn't my place to get involved in family dynamics. But what happened that night, watching her literally prevent you from getting help when you were dying, I realized that staying silent made me complicit in her abuse. I can't live with that anymore." Our mother Carol's awakening to the reality of Brianna's behavior was perhaps the most significant development in our fight for justice. Despite months of Brianna's manipulation and attempts to turn her against me, Carol finally began to see through her daughter's lies when she witnessed firsthand how Brianna responded to the mounting evidence against her. The turning point came during a family meeting where Brianna's attorney presented their version of events, which painted me as a delusional individual who had manipulated medical professionals into misdiagnosing a psychiatric condition as a cardiac emergency. I sat there listening to this lawyer describe my daughter as some kind of master manipulator who had fooled doctors and nurses and paramedics, Carol told me later. And suddenly I realized that the story they were telling didn't match anything I knew about Hazel's character or capabilities. "You're not devious enough to pull off that kind of elaborate deception, and more importantly, you wouldn't want to." That's when I finally understood that Brianna had been lying to me about everything. The emergence of other family members who had experienced Brianna's manipulation firsthand created a powerful chorus of voices supporting our case. Cousin Lucy provided detailed documentation of the phone calls where Brianna had spread rumors about my mental health, including recordings she had made when she became suspicious of Brianna's claims. Uncle Frank shared similar evidence, along with his growing concerns about Brianna's attempts to isolate me from the extended family. Perhaps most surprisingly, a support group of people who had experienced similar family medical abuse began to rally around our case. Through Dr. Chen, my therapist, I was connected with others who had been victims of relatives who used medical emergencies and health issues as tools of control and manipulation. Their stories were remarkably similar to mine, and their willingness to speak publicly about their experiences helped establish a pattern of behavior that supported our legal arguments. The local news media also became interested in our story, particularly after a journalist named Maria Rodriguez began investigating cases of family medical abuse in our area. Her preliminary research had uncovered several similar situations where family members had used medical gatekeeping as a form of control, and she saw our case as an opportunity to highlight a form of abuse that often goes unrecognized and unpunished. "What makes this case particularly compelling," Rodriguez told her viewers during a preliminary news report, "is the extensive documentation of the defendant's behavior and the clear medical evidence of the harm that could have resulted from delaying emergency treatment. This isn't a case of family dysfunction or poor communication. This appears to be a calculated campaign of medical abuse that could have had fatal consequences." The legal momentum began to shift dramatically in our favor when Brianna's own attorney, Richard Blackwood, abruptly withdrew from the case after reviewing the evidence we had assembled. While attorney-client privilege prevented him from explaining his decision publicly, his departure sent a clear signal that even someone who specialized in defending mental health competency cases found Brianna's position indefensible. "When your opponent's lawyer quits," James Patterson explained to me, It usually means they've realized their client's case is not just weak, but potentially fraudulent. No reputable attorney wants to be associated with a case where they might be sanctioned for filing frivolous claims or knowingly presenting false evidence to the court. The community support that emerged around our case was both overwhelming and validating. People who had known our family for years began coming forward with their own observations about Brianna's behavior, including several who had witnessed her dismissive attitude toward my health concerns at various family gatherings and social events. Their willingness to speak publicly helped establish that what had happened the night of my cardiac emergency was not an isolated incident, but part of a long-term pattern of medical abuse and manipulation. The family intervention that finally brought all the truth into the open was facilitated by Dr. Sandra Chen, a licensed family therapist who specialized in cases involving psychological abuse and manipulation within family systems. After reviewing all the evidence that had been gathered during our legal preparation, Dr. Chen agreed to mediate a structured confrontation where Brianna would be forced to face the overwhelming evidence of her systematic campaign against me while surrounded by family members and professionals who could provide support and ensure everyone's safety. The intervention took place at Dr. Chen's office, a neutral location that had been chosen specifically to prevent Brianna from using her usual tactics of controlling the environment and manipulating the dynamics of the conversation. Present were myself, Derek, our mother Carol, Dr. Williams, the hospital social worker Susan, my attorney James Patterson, and several family members who had been affected by Brianna's lies and manipulation. Brianna attended with her new attorney, a younger lawyer named David Kim, who had agreed to represent her after Richard Blackwood's withdrawal from the case. Dr. Chen began the session by establishing ground rules that would prevent Brianna from derailing the conversation with her usual tactics of deflection and blame shifting. Each person present would have the opportunity to present their evidence and observations without interruption, and Brianna would be required to respond to specific allegations with factual information rather than emotional manipulation or personal attacks. The first piece of evidence presented was the hospital security footage from the night of my cardiac emergency, which was played on a large screen in Dr. Chen's office. Watching the footage was emotionally devastating for everyone present, particularly our mother, who had not previously seen the visual evidence of how Brianna had blocked my access to medical help while I was clearly in distress. The recording showed Brianna's body language and facial expressions during the crisis, revealing a cold detachment that was shocking to witness. What we see in this footage, Dr. Williams explained to the group, is not someone who is concerned about her sister's well-being, but someone who is actively preventing her from receiving potentially life-saving medical care. The patient is clearly in cardiac distress, she's asked multiple times for help, and the defendant is physically blocking her access to emergency services while dismissing legitimate medical symptoms as attention-seeking behavior. Derek's testimony about the legal documents he had found in Brianna's desk was equally damning. He presented copies of the guardianship research, the notes about my supposed mental instability, and the detailed timeline Brianna had created to document what she considered evidence of my incompetency. The systematic nature of her planning was evident in every document, showing that her campaign against me had been carefully orchestrated over a period of years. These documents show a pattern of calculated abuse, James Patterson explained to the group. The defendant wasn't simply skeptical about her sister's health concerns. She was actively working to undermine her credibility, isolate her from family support, and position herself to gain legal control over her sister's life and assets. This goes far beyond family dysfunction into the realm of criminal behavior. The psychological evaluation that Dr. Chen had conducted on Brianna prior to the intervention revealed a personality profile consistent with narcissistic personality disorder, with particular emphasis on her need for control and her inability to empathize with others' experiences. Dr. Chen explained that people with this condition often engage in what's called gaslighting, where they systematically undermine another person's perception of reality in order to maintain dominance and control within relationships. What we see in Brianna's behavior toward her sister is a textbook example of psychological abuse, Dr. Chen told the group. She has consistently dismissed, minimized, and reframed Hazel's legitimate health concerns in order to maintain her position as the competent family member while positioning Hazel as unstable and unreliable. This kind of systematic undermining can be just as damaging as physical abuse, particularly when it prevents someone from accessing necessary medical care. Under the pressure of being confronted with overwhelming evidence and professional assessment, Brianna's carefully maintained facade finally began to crack. When presented with the phone records, showing her calls to family members and my workplace, along with recordings of some of those conversations, she initially tried to deny making the calls. However, when faced with undeniable proof, she shifted to justifying her actions as being motivated by genuine concern for my well-being. "I was trying to protect her," Brianna said, her voice taking on a defensive tone that was unfamiliar to those who knew her usual confident demeanor. "She's always been unstable, always looking for attention, and I was afraid she was going to hurt herself or make poor decisions that would affect the whole family. I was trying to get her help, not hurt her." But as Dr. Chen continued to present evidence of Brianna's systematic campaign, including the legal research into guardianship procedures, and the detailed documentation of my supposed incompetency, Brianna's justifications became increasingly desperate and contradictory. When confronted with Derek's testimony about her research into having me declared legally incompetent, she finally broke down and admitted to the true scope of her planning. "She doesn't deserve everything that Mom and Dad worked for," Brianna said, her mask of concern finally slipping to reveal the jealousy and resentment that had been driving her behavior. "I'm the one who stayed close to home. I'm the one who takes care of Mom. I'm the one who's been responsible my whole life. Why should she get half of everything when she's never done anything but cause problems and worry everyone with her constant health issues?" The financial motive behind Brianna's campaign was laid bare when she continued her confession under Dr. Chen's skilled questioning. "I worked hard to build a case that would show she couldn't take care of herself," Brianna said, apparently not realizing how damaging her admissions were to any remaining credibility she might have had. "I documented every time she seemed anxious or sick or unable to handle stress, because I knew that eventually someone would need to step in and make decisions for her. I was protecting Mom's assets from someone who would just waste them on medical bills and psychiatric treatment." The room was silent as Brianna continued to reveal the calculated nature of her abuse. She admitted to intercepting my medical correspondence, to spreading rumors about my mental health to family members and my employer, and to researching legal procedures that would allow her to gain control over my medical and financial decisions. What was most chilling was her complete lack of remorse or understanding about how her actions had nearly cost me my life. Derek's testimony about the night of my cardiac emergency brought the intervention to its emotional climax. "I watched my wife literally block her sister from calling for help while she was having a heart attack," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Even when the paramedics arrived and confirmed it was a real emergency, even when the doctors said she could have died, Brianna still insisted that everyone was wrong and that Hazel was just being dramatic. I realized that night that I was married to someone who was capable of watching her own sister die rather than admit she was wrong." Our mother Carol's reaction to hearing the full truth about Brianna's behavior was heartbreaking to witness. "I enabled this," she said through her tears. "I knew Brianna could be critical of Hazel, but I thought it was just normal sibling rivalry. I never imagined that she was actively working to hurt her sister, or that she was planning to take control of her life. I failed both of my daughters by not seeing what was really happening." The intervention concluded with Dr. Chen's professional assessment that Brianna posed a continued threat to my safety and well-being, and her recommendation that criminal charges be pursued for endangerment and fraud. The overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse, combined with Brianna's own admissions during the intervention, provided more than enough grounds for both criminal prosecution and civil litigation to recover damages for the harm she had caused to my health, career, and relationships. 6 months after that terrifying night, when my own sister nearly let me die, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The legal proceedings against Brianna had concluded with her pleading guilty to criminal endangerment and fraud charges, receiving 3 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. While some might think the sentence was too lenient for someone who had systematically abused her own family member, I found peace in knowing that her actions had been officially recognized as criminal behavior, and that she was required to undergo treatment for her psychological disorders. The civil lawsuit we pursued alongside the criminal case resulted in a substantial financial settlement that covered my medical expenses, lost wages, and compensation for the emotional trauma I had endured. More importantly, the legal process had created an official record of Brianna's abuse that would prevent her from ever again questioning my competency or attempting to gain control over my medical or financial decisions. The restraining order that was put in place as part of the settlement meant that Brianna was legally prohibited from contacting me, my employer, my doctors, or any other aspect of my life. My physical recovery from the stress cardiomyopathy had been remarkably complete, thanks to Dr. Williams' expertise and the comprehensive cardiac rehabilitation program I had participated in at the hospital. The irony was not lost on me that the heart condition Brianna had dismissed as dramatics had actually strengthened my cardiovascular system through the treatment and lifestyle changes I had implemented. Regular exercise, stress management techniques, and careful attention to my overall health had left me feeling stronger and more vital than I had in years. The transformation in my family dynamics was perhaps the most significant change of all. Derek had finalized his divorce from Brianna and was now in a healthy relationship with a woman named Jennifer, who had actually been one of the paramedics who responded to my emergency that night. Their relationship had developed slowly over the months as Derek worked through the trauma of realizing he had been married to someone capable of such calculated cruelty. Jennifer's medical background and her witness to Brianna's behavior that night created a unique understanding between them about what Derek had experienced. Our mother Carol had undergone her own intensive therapy to understand how she had enabled Brianna's abusive behavior for so many years. I thought being a good mother meant treating both my daughters equally and not taking sides, she explained to me during one of our regular lunch meetings. But what I realize now is that neutrality in the face of abuse is actually a form of enabling. When one child is systematically harming another, equal treatment isn't fair or protective. It's abandonment of the child who needs support. Carol's relationship with Brianna remained complicated and limited. While she hadn't cut off all contact with her elder daughter, she had established firm boundaries about their interactions and refused to engage with Brianna's ongoing attempts to justify her behavior or portray herself as the victim of family betrayal. "I love Brianna," Carol told me, "but I can't trust her, and I won't allow her to manipulate me into doubting what I now know to be true about her treatment of you." My career had not only survived Brianna's attempts at sabotage, but had actually flourished as a result of the skills and insights I had gained through the legal process. My experience with family abuse and medical neglect had led me to specialize in cases involving vulnerable adults who were being manipulated or abused by family members. Working with other victims of family psychological abuse had become both personally therapeutic and professionally fulfilling, as I was able to use my own experience to help others navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of standing up to abusive relatives. The relationship that had developed between Dr. Williams and me was unexpected, but deeply meaningful. What had begun as a doctor-patient relationship during my cardiac emergency had evolved into friendship and eventually into romance. His witness to my family's behavior that night, combined with his understanding of medical abuse, created a foundation of trust and understanding that I had never experienced in previous relationships. I knew from the moment I saw how your family treated you that you deserved so much better, he told me. Your strength in fighting back against that systematic abuse showed me the kind of person you really are. Perhaps most importantly, I had found my voice in advocacy work that extended far beyond my own case. Speaking at medical conferences about family medical abuse had helped raise awareness about a form of domestic violence that often goes unrecognized by healthcare professionals. My presentations focused on teaching doctors and nurses to recognize the warning signs of family members who use medical gatekeeping as a form of control, and how to intervene when they suspect that a patient is being prevented from receiving appropriate care. Hazel's case has become a teaching example in our emergency medicine residency program, Dr. Williams told a conference audience where we spoke together. It demonstrates how family dynamics can literally be life-threatening, and how medical professionals need to be prepared to advocate for patients even when their own relatives are working against their best interests. We now have protocols in place to recognize and respond to family medical abuse, largely because of what we learned from this case. The legal precedent established by our case had also led to changes in how hospitals and emergency services respond to situations where family members are blocking or discouraging medical care. New protocols required medical staff to speak privately with patients when family members seem to be minimizing or dismissing their symptoms, and to document any instances where relatives appeared to be preventing appropriate medical intervention. The therapeutic work I had done with Dr. Chen had taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing and responding to manipulation and psychological abuse. What you survived with Brianna was a form of systematic psychological torture, Dr. Chen explained during one of our sessions. Learning to trust your own perceptions again, to believe in your own right to safety and medical care, that's been the real work of your recovery. Your sister spent years teaching you to doubt yourself, but you found the courage to speak up when it literally meant the difference between life and death. The support network I had built through this experience had become a chosen family that provided the love and loyalty that my biological family had failed to offer. Mrs. Patterson had become like a grandmother to me. Derek felt more like a brother than Brianna ever had like a sister, and the connections I had made with other survivors of family abuse had created relationships based on mutual understanding and genuine care rather than obligation or manipulation. Looking back on that terrifying night, when my chest pain began at Brianna's dinner table, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if Derek hadn't finally found the courage to call 911, or if Mrs. Patterson hadn't witnessed the situation and insisted on medical intervention. The doctors had been clear that delaying treatment much longer could have resulted in complete heart failure and death, which meant that Brianna's systematic campaign of medical abuse had very nearly achieved the ultimate victory of silencing me forever. But what strikes me most powerfully now is how that crisis became the catalyst for exposing years of hidden abuse and ultimately led to a life that was more authentic, healthy, and fulfilling than anything I had experienced before. Speaking my truth about family medical abuse, even when it meant facing legal battles and family fractures, had been necessary not just for my own survival, but for the safety and well-being of others who might face similar situations. The final lesson I learned through this experience was that family titles don't automatically confer love, loyalty, or safety. Being someone's sister, daughter, or relative doesn't mean they have your best interests at heart, and sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually the ones who pose the greatest threat to your well-being. Learning to prioritize my own safety and health over family harmony had been difficult, but essential, and it was a lesson I now shared with other victims of family abuse whenever I had the opportunity. If you're watching this video because you've experienced something similar, whether it's family members dismissing your health concerns, preventing you from getting medical care, or systematically undermining your credibility and independence, please know that you're not alone and that speaking up about abuse is always the right choice, even when it feels impossible. Trust your instincts about your own body and health, seek support from professionals and trusted friends outside your family system, and remember that no one has the right to prevent you from protecting yourself, no matter what their relationship to you might be. Have you ever experienced a family member dismissing your medical concerns, or preventing you from getting help when you needed it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find the courage to speak up about their own situation. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and abuse, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting yourself and seeking help when you need it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your health, safety, and well-being are always worth fighting for, regardless of who might be working against them. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve proper medical care and family support.